What is your name?
Gloria Rodriguez.
What are you?
Violent revolutionary.
What's your name?
Janet Tucker.
Janet, what are you?
The violent revolutionary.
My name is Jimmy Anderson, and I'm a violent revolutionary, and I'll kill for this cause.
We lived in a tent on the beach in the Virgin Islands. When I was 3, my father hitchhiked to Colorado with my 9-year-old brother when I was 8. My father walked down the middle of the road naked when I was 13. He was gone 3 years. He was gone 30 years. Indigent by choice, not circumstance. Accepted, but why? Brilliant, fascinating, charismatic, creative, but not worthy of respect as a father. Will I end up crazy like him? Ask Stephen Jones. My mother was raised in a Methodist church, but she doesn't bother anymore. My sister was baptized as a baby, but her children never were. I was baptized as an adult, but consider Christ a metaphor. Jim Jones wasn't raised in a church. He started his own. He married a Methodist. Marceline's father was a minister. He had a relationship with another woman. Carolyn's father was a minister. Jim Jones learned of the Methodist Social Creed in 1952 and decided to enter the ministry. The Methodists rewrote their creed in 1952 to dispel allegations of communist ideals. Jones demonstrated his Marxism in 1952. The thought was, infiltrate the church. And so he did. My sister married a Catholic by association. His mother was a Catholic, although she may have rejected it. Her mother was a Catholic, practically a saint, really. She said, quote, "I have long since come to believe that people never mean half of what they say, and that is, it is best to disregard their talk and judge only their actions," end quote. Jim Jones, his actions spoke louder than words, but fell on deaf ears and blind eyes. Dorothy Day lived up to her ideals.
It had an essentially religious theme. Their motto was, an injury to one is an injury to all. It's one of another, and when the health of one member suffers, the health of the whole body is undermined. After all, religion was the opium of the people. My old communist friends used to say Dorothy would never be a good communist, she's too religious.
Jim Jones peddled the opiate of People's Temple. A New York Times article describes Vermont communes, quote, "The Red Clover Collective was the educated, affluent kids. The people at Free Farm were middle-class kids emulating the Red Clover hippies. Johnson's pasture was the Ellis Island of the commune movement, drawing people in, nowhere to go, and nothing else to do," end quote. Jim Jones drew people in. I interviewed Veranda Porsche, matriarch and poet. Quote, "Scott came over and told us about Jonestown, the weird reverend, the black Kool-Aid, the dying families. And we thought he was stoned and confabulating. I still remember the terrible hilarity of it all. At our farm, we had no leaders, no specific ideology, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs," end quote. The same Marxist principle, twisted to some ungodly end by Jim Jones. In an interview with John Douglas, filmmaker, quote, "We came together, shared a political experience, not a commune, just a collective, not sitting around smoking dope," end quote. They started Newsreel. Most of the activists in Newsreel were upper middle class, artsy bohemian whites in their mid to late 20s, who were from wealthy intellectual backgrounds. Filmmaker Robert Kramer assessed Red Clover almost 2 decades later, quote, "We thought the revolution was about to happen at any moment. We had a short-range apocalyptic perspective, which was completely wrong," end quote. So also thought Jim Jones. I met Gypsy in Crested Butte, Colorado. He put a 10-penny nail up his nose when I was 8. They had a family reunion at our house in Vermont while we were away at a wedding when I was 11. Mom says they were so lazy, they laid in the swale on the side of the road, thumb in the air, hitching a ride. She drove Midget Jesse to a hospital when someone fell on him. They seem happy, and yet, quote, they subsisted on drugs and booze. They wore rags and decorated themselves with animal bones and STP oil stickers. They eschewed bathing. They panhandled, stole things, and peddled drugs, end quote. Does People's Temple seem so different? People seek to fulfill their needs: community, shelter, safe haven, self-control, or even thoughtless abandon. I joined a cult when I was 25. They tried to take my individuality. I was skilled in breaking the selfish nature of others. I could have died for something I didn't believe in. We knew the inhumanity of man. Jonestown survivor Jordan Vilches says, quote, "We as a society condemn the People's Temple leadership that sent its members off to die in a Guyanese jungle. But what's the difference between that leadership and one which sends youth brimming over with gallant idealism off to die in a war in a place they knew nothing about?" End quote. I would go back. Are they members of a cult? Are they missionaries? Are they Methodists?
Nobody joins a cult.
Are they in Jonestown? Were they there for the same reason on the last day as they were on the first day?
The following presentation is a juxtaposition of two sermons. The words of Jim Jones will be read by Matt Liguori, and I'll be reading a sermon written by myself.
And I affirmed that I should live, and I stepped up last Sunday, last August, and I preached all night, and I counseled all night, and I raised our people up from their diseases, and I healed our brother Joe Hell of an epileptic seizure because I knew my body was God's.
There is no healing that I can do for you that you cannot do for yourself. If you want to be made whole again, you must take that journey into your own hands. This man here had his legs broken, yet there is nothing I can do for him than offer the counsel of a friend. When they heal, it will be thanks to the science and medicine of the world around him. For there is nothing I have to offer him. When they heal, he will need to do the work required to restore his legs to full health. This physical therapy will be hard, and he must undertake it himself. I offer no miracles. I can only guide you to your own solutions.
If the earthquake comes, and the nuclear war that we prophesied did come, and it will come, then we will be well prepared. We just need some more supplies. But between now and that prophesied day, a dictator may rise up, and we'll have to take a short journey out of this land to save our lives. Now, don't think it couldn't happen to you.
I offer no prophecies of the future. I have vivid dreams of the future, but these are not prophecies. To follow these dreams would be poisonous. The only thing that the world offers to guide us is the knowledge of what is happening and what has happened in the past. The only profit to us is the knowledge and logic that we all possess. Using knowledge and logic, we will be able to see what might become of us and act upon it thusly. I have dreamed of nuclear war but that is not what is to come. I have dreamed of a future where people live in harmony, but that is not what is to come either. What is to come is only the unity and happiness that we can bring to each other on each day.
I am here, the Spirit of Christ, to set you free, to unbind you, to set you at liberty and freedom.
I am not God, nor any reincarnation of God that there might be. My spiritual power comes from my belief in the happiness and strength that I can bring to others by showing them the strength and happiness that they have within themselves. This power is not unique to me, nor would I claim it to be mine if I could. This is a power that I strive to share with all that I meet, for there is no greater power in the world than one can have than the ability to improve the lives of others.
You are so obsessed to fill yourself up with the wares of the capitalist trade, to make the rich richer and keep your belly so fat that you can't see your own feet.
I cannot offer any divine opinion on the benefits of capitalism or socialism or communism. There is no inherent evil in any of these. In all of these systems, if we love each other and try to bring each person around us happiness, we will find success. Opponents of socialism and communism argue that there will be those parasitically draining the wealthy of their hard-earned money. But in a society of respect and happiness, how can one take without thinking of the hand that is giving them? Opponents of capitalism look to the fat cats at the top, stomping those below. But in a society of respect and happiness, how could one hoard so greedily without thinking of those who they could help? We cannot fear that which is around us. We must understand and love the world which we are in. For there is no fear in love. There's no understanding in fear. Where we understand, we can learn to love. There's nothing that can be gained through manipulation and trickery and hate that cannot be achieved through love and understanding.
Things we'd like to believe about Jim Jones. That he was half human, half spider, his additional limbs somehow hidden behind the pew. That people could hear the venom in his voice. That those who didn't were fragmented beings. Illiterate people who didn't believe in haircuts, enjoyed dancing barefooted on glass shards, sang to a moon god while praising the devil, and fed friends poisonous berries as practical jokes. We'd like to believe that they looked nothing like us, not in a figurative way. We want to know that they had extra limbs, that their hearts were 3 times too small, that they had paws instead of feet, that some of them even had an extra head. How badly we want to know that not a single one of the 8 legs hiding behind the pew might have held something for us.
Over 300 children died in Jonestown on that day. And Marcelin Jones served as a mother to not only these children, but also their leader and her husband, Reverend Jim Jones. Being that the children in religious groups are often taught morals through Bible stories rather than conventional fiction, the following pseudo-scripture is an attempt to convey the tragic story of Reverend Jim Jones and his People's Temple in a way that Marcelin could have told the children in Jonestown. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the husband who strayed, 2 men. A reading from the book of Marcelin. There once was an isolated shepherd boy. He had not a father and relied on stray pups and sheep to raise him. He convinced them and himself that he would not raise them for slaughter. He was a good shepherd, able to see the wolves in the distance and lead his flock to safety. One night in the field, the shepherd boy lay on the cool mountainside with a ewe when he saw a bright light pierce the abysmal blackness. He considered following it, leading his flock to salvation, but he thought better of it. He saw kings and pauper alike trace the star's path with eager eyes and decided that he would be that eternal light. He would be the one to lead his flock to salvation. His duty was reverent, but the journey of a self-proclaimed Messiah is a lonely one. He cloaked his internal solitude with the wool of his flock. They gave it willingly, bowing down to their shepherd and savior. His coat of black and white together shocked the other shepherds who passed on the mountains, but with each encounter, his flock would grow with those who saw his light. In time, the flock could blanket an entire mountainside at the shepherd's slightest whistle. There are dangers behind every tree, behind every rock, he warned. Stay close to me, and I shall protect you. He put his hands to his chest, the thick black and white wool ever increasing the distance between his hand and his heart. The sheep trembled in fear. They heard howls in the night and screamed for their savior. Deliver us from evil, they would bleat. The shepherd would laugh quietly, and then quite loudly, and bring the sheep into his arms. There is no danger tonight, my lamb. Those were my howls. I wanted to know that you were listening. However, real danger draws near, so stay close. Never leave the flock, and never lead your little lamb astray. I alone can protect you. A pack of dogs who passed showed interest in the flock that could cover a mountainside. They sniffed the sheep and questioned the pups who assisted the shepherd in his duties. The shepherd distrusted the dogs and grew distressed when he saw 7 sheep slip away from their shepherd with the Shetlands. These dogs, he sneered through his teeth, are wolves in sheep's clothing. Do not let them pull wool over your eyes. They will lead you astray. They will take our lambs away from our care and raise them for slaughter. They will shear your wool and spill your blood and the blood of all that is good, all that we have built together. The time has come. Let us go down to the pasture and lay down. Follow your shepherd to peace. Follow your shepherd to salvation. The sheep began to scream, but in their fear they could see no alternative to following their shepherd away from the mountain to which he had led them. The pups nipped at the hooves of the ewes, who prodded their lambs with their muzzles to show them the way. The sheep followed their fearless leader to pasture. They did not hear the fear in his voice, nor could they see the overwrought terror in his eyes. As the lambs fell to silence and the sheep followed suit, the shepherd and his pups sat among them with closed eyes, and the wolves descended from the mountainside. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to you, Jimbo Jones.
It was extremely hard for Claire Gennaro after the massacre, especially losing her 2 children. Claire and her husband survived, but it was very difficult for both of them to re-enter society and to try and live a so-called normal life again. Everything was very overwhelming, including the mourning over the death of her children and the loss of the people she loved that died at Jonestown. However, before the massacre, Claire was committed to and involved in People's Temple. She played a large role in Jonestown. When she was on her way to visit her 2 children who were already in Jonestown, it was requested of her to bring a list of items as shown on the screen. Some of these items include over 90,000 sheets of paper, alcohol, tape, coffee pots, towels, pencils and erasers, Band-Aids, soap, 50 bottles of lotion, 100 garbage bags, baby aspirin, cough syrup, 5 dozen diapers, plastic and glass bottles, powder, and pacifiers, to name a few. Part of the reason that Claire decided to go to Jonestown was because of the letters that she had been receiving from her dear friend Marlene, who described how wonderful and amazing Jonestown was. Here is Marlene's letter. My dear Claire, it is beautiful here. We are planting hundreds of fruit trees, pineapples, and acres of sweet potatoes, cassava, and peanuts. We hope to get a dairy going soon here. The bakery has been expanded and really produces. The fish tastes so good. We are having beautiful weather here. Well, your 2 children, Mari and Darren, are very happy. Darren's hair is long. He wants me to cut it, and I will soon. He's well liked by his teachers, seems really happy in school. Mari is also blossoming, but isn't interested in boys yet. So relax, Claire. You'll probably be here by then. We know you all look forward to coming, and we are working toward that end. With principle we win. Marlene. After the death of her 2 children and the mass murder in Jonestown, Claire was absolutely devastated.
This was the Jim Jones. This was a sweetness that we knew that apparently had a devil underneath, and it emerged. I don't understand it. It was totally different. The Redwood Valley Jim Jones was a different person than what I know today. He was no better than a Hitler, maybe even worse, because at least the world knew what Hitler was doing. We didn't stop it then. Maybe we're no more guilty.
You worked for this man for 7 years. You never saw any indication?
Not of this kind of craziness. I wanted to believe that there was somebody here on earth who had the power to care and could bring good for everybody. That's all. I just wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe that there was somebody. I couldn't touch God in the sky. God in the sky had caused death and destruction. And you can help it, and you can hold it, and it's taken from you. You can go into an orphanage and hold a baby. You can go into a prison and help somebody, and they're taken from you. What's the use if Nixon can get off scot-free and others go to prison? What's the use in the United States if you're poor and you go to prison and you go to jail and you get hung and you stay there for years, and if you're rich? That's Tim Swinney. He's dead. Dorothy, she was a little girl that lived with me. I had like an adopted daughter, and she's gone. She was on the list.
Dead?
Dead. It's Darren, my son. We were tie-dyeing here. Here's little Darius Wheeler and his brother Jeff Wheeler. They all live with me. Their mother, them, I'm sure they're dead. This is Marlene and I at Disneyland. She's dead.
Claire Gennaro was severely depressed for some time, but was able to get back on her feet once she started taking antidepressants. Another part of her recovery is her long-standing relationship with Temple members, family, and friends that survived or that were a part of the Temple community in some way. I hope that Claire is able to continue with her healing each and every day and find the peace in her life now that Jonestown once brought her.
Timothy Stone initially joined People's Temple not because he believed in his faith feelings or was a lost soul, but because he was impressed with the Reverend Jim Jones's commitment to helping the community and for adopting an African American child. Tim Stone soon became the legal advisor for Jim Jones and all of People's Temple. My presentation about Timothy Stone will be a list poem that is written from his perspective, listing major events in his life as they occurred. Imagining I was Tim Stone. I am a Stanford Law School graduate. I wanted to fight for justice. I desired integration and civil rights. I believed in a utopia. I married a woman 12 years younger than me. I found out about People's Temple. I thought this was utopia at last. I believed, adored, and loved Jim Jones. I could finally sue and defend for justice. I became People's Temple's lawyer. I became Jim Jones's lawyer. I was humiliated and called a homosexual by Jim Jones. I still believed, adored, and loved Jim Jones. I blindly fought battles for him. I could finally sue and defend for him. I had a baby with Grace. I blindly signed over my John Victor Stone. I argued with Grace, and we separated for a while. I was sent to work in Jonestown and Georgetown. I realized his people searched my briefcase. I decided to flee from his grasp. I wanted to fight for my son. I worked with Grace to begin a custody battle. I won an arrest warrant for John, but I missed my chance at the 6-day siege. I joined the concerned relatives. I fought for John, but failed again and again. I was targeted and harassed by him. I tried again with Congressman Leo Ryan. I wasn't allowed in, so I was helpless. I was helpless when I heard Leo Ryan was killed. I was helpless when I heard of the mass suicide. I was helpless when I heard Sharon Amos killed herself and her children. I was helpless when I heard that John was among the poison. I failed to save my son for the last time. I took him down, but he took parts of me with him. My family, my son, my faith, my friends, and my life. I am Tim Stone, and this is my story. After this horrible turn in his life, Tim Stone carried on. He continued to practice law and even started a private practice at one point. In 1998, Tim Stone reappeared in the news, running for California State Senate. He went on to work at various district attorneys' offices, being regarded as an excellent attorney by many of his colleagues.
John Victor Stone is probably among the most well-known of all the children whose lives were tragically lost in Jonestown on November 18, 1978. The significance of John Victor Stone did not, however, save him from meeting the same tragic end as his 908 fellow Jonestown residents on that fateful day.
He was among the 300 children who never got to grow up, never had the chance to make their mark on the world, never had the opportunity to show the world what they could do or who they could become.
To me, these tragic losses are some of the most heartbreaking. It seems as though these 300 children are grouped together, dehumanized, and collectively known as the children of Jonestown.
In John's case, his life is further overshadowed by the custody battle that defines his tragically short time. I think that he deserves to be known for the child he was, not the quest for power that he often seems to represent.
Bonnie Yates, a contributor to the Jonestown Report, wrote a remembrance on John. She closes this touching tribute with the sentiment, quote, "To those who died at Jonestown, even to John Victor on that fateful day, it didn't matter whose son he was. He was the son of Jonestown, and he died along with the dream that it was."
What follows is a eulogy for John Victor Stone, and, in a way, for all the other often forgotten children of Jonestown, for whom we will never know their true potential.
John Victor Stone was born on January 25, 1972, the only son of Grace Stone.
We are told that there is no greater love than between a mother and her child. It is unconditional, unstoppable, unimaginable. We are told about the bond between a mother and her child. It is both nature and nurture, biological and psychological, tangible and transient.
The paternity of the child, however, is not so easy to determine. The custody battle over John Victor Stone was one of the most hotly debated topics in the history of the People's Temple. The birth certificate of John Victor Stone lists his parents as Tim and Grace Stone. Just a few short days after John's birth, however, Tim Stone signed an affidavit declaring that Jim Jones was the father.
Imagine that love, that bond, ripped, breached, thrown aside because of the wishes of another individual. That individual does not feel sorry. He is not remorseful. He is worried. worried that the child might be retrieved.
This seemingly innocent document was just the beginning of the battle that would come to define John's short life.
Out of insecurity, Jim Jones does the worst thing of all. He turns the child against the mother. The bond that existed is weakened. It is wounded, over and over again. The mother is allowed a phone call to her child. But her child is different. He lacks excitement. He is flat. He holds back. The mother aches because her son is so young, so vulnerable. His mind is still being formed. The call is cut short.
The custody battle was more complicated than the web of documents that arose from the legal proceedings surrounding the dispute. When the Guyanese marshal nailed the court order awarding Greystone custody of John to Jim Jones's door, he could not have known that he was hammering one of the final nails into the coffin of the People's Temple.
The mother has nowhere to turn but the law. But by now her son is far away, isolated, protected. The issue over the bond, it becomes bigger, and something so pure and so natural, so authentic as the love between mother and child is driven to something so artificial, so tainted with political interest. Lawyers, judges, court dates. 91 congressmen write letters on the mother's behalf.
Life in Jonestown was not easy. I'm sure that to those living there, the laughter of children was one of the few sources of true joy and goodness. It must have been refreshing to see the light and life shining in John's dark eyes and to hear the laughter ringing from his bright smile. These are the things for which John and all the children should be remembered. To those in Jonestown, John was undoubtedly so much more than the custody battle that defines his tragically short life. He was a son, a brother, a friend, who unknowingly bore the weight of the lives of hundreds on his small shoulders.
Bob Houston married his high school sweetheart Phyllis in 1962. He was a freshman at Berkeley. Their two daughters, Judy and Patty, were born within the next 2 years. Bob was an intelligent man with an incredible work ethic and managed to maintain an exceptional GPA while working nights at the Southern Pacific Railroad to support his family. He was also a talented musician and dedicated to social progress. This is reflected by his participation in the protests during the free speech movement. After graduation, he earned his teaching credentials and was hired in Mendocino County, where a like-minded colleague named Carolyn invited him to a People's Temple barbecue where he finally felt welcomed. He admired the racially integrated group of people who were clearly close friends and was attracted to their socialist philosophy. Phyllis also felt at home among the Temple members, where they understood her lack of fulfillment and frustration with being a stay-at-home mother. Their children also made friends, and the couple liked the combination of close-knit community feel and dedication to Christian beliefs. Bob became extremely invested in the church. Despite his busy schedule, he was generous with giving his time, money, and other things to People's Temple. While teaching full-time and supervising the school's band and chorus, and giving music lessons, he participated in the Temple Band and assisted with church publications. He also became a music therapist at the Mendocino State Hospital and donated this entire salary to the church. Bob and Phyllis soon divorced, and Bob married another Temple member, Joyce Shaw, a kind and smart woman who was a good mother to Judy and Patty. However, Joyce defected from the church in 1976. Predominantly due to her qualms with the false confessions church members were forced to sign to prove their loyalty. A few months after Joyce's defection, Bob's mutilated body was found along the tracks of the railroad yard where he worked. Though no one was charged with his murder, the circumstances surrounding his death were suspicious. The temple claims that he'd resigned the morning of his death, but Joyce suspects that one of the blank papers Bob had signed was used to make it seem that he was no longer affiliated with the temple. Jones claimed that Bob had fallen asleep on the job because he had been working so hard. But Joyce does not believe this, considering how careful of a man Bob was. Joyce contacted Bob's parents and begged them to keep Bob's children away from Jonestown, but their biological mother, Phyllis' wishes prevailed, or perhaps Joan's wishes prevailed, and Jody and Patty were sent to Guyana. Sammy Houston was the father of Bob Houston, whose mysterious death is suspected to be the result of a disintegrating loyalty of the People's Temple. Sammy wished to keep Bob's daughters, Judy and Patricia, away from Jonestown, as their stepmother, Joyce, advised, but his wishes of the biological mother, Phyllis, prevailed. Sammy did not get to say goodbye to his beloved granddaughters before they were sent to Guyana. Sammy did not believe that his son's death was an accident, and he became concerned with his granddaughter's safety. He confided in several Associated Press reporters, including Tim Reiterman, who he roomed with as they covered the Kennedy inauguration as journalists. Reiterman became closely involved in the investigation of the church. Sammy Houston eventually communicated the story of People's Temple to his friend and Congressman Leo Ryan. Houston's story is what sparked Ryan's interest in the People's Temple and was the initial cause for his leading the final investigation in 1978.
Leo Ryan's life and his deeds are about a life that was so much more than Guyana. He was relentless in a search for answers that were not readily available by just asking questions. We remember him today because his story is so much like those of most Americans. We want to believe the best, but we sometimes hear the worst.
This statement by Jackie Spire appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle on November 18th of 1983, 5 years to the date after the loss of over 900 lives in Guyana. The loss of Congressman Leo Ryan may have only been one of the 918, but his role in the tragedy was both crucial and inspiring.
Leo Ryan was born in Nebraska in 1925. Growing up, he moved around often, attending schools in 5 different states.
Only after serving 3 years in the United States Navy did future Congressman Leo Ryan graduate from Creighton University. He then taught history at a high school in California. He led the school marching band to the inaugural speech of President John F. Kennedy. He became inspired by JFK's call to service.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Beginning in 1962, Ryan served as mayor of South San Francisco. In the following decade, he would serve as an assemblyman, eventually being elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1972.
By all accounts, Leo Ryan's political career was defined by his idealism and his quest for justice. Friend and journalist Karen Feld captured the person Ryan was, describing him in terms of his intellectual curiosity and insatiable appetite for experiencing the unfamiliar, to see reality for himself, however unpleasant the sight may be.
As state assemblyman in 1970, Ryan used a pseudonym to be arrested and detained. He subsequently spent 10 days in the Folsom State Prison as to investigate California inmate conditions firsthand. These aforementioned experiences led Leo Ryan to become interested with the People's Temple and Jim Jones. He repeatedly tried to raise awareness about Jonestown, but was discouraged by the U.S. State Department, who wished to avoid, quote, legal controversy with the Guyanese government. Leo Ryan nonetheless addressed Congress on the issue.
Leo Ryan was convinced by the concerned relatives to look into the People's Temple and Jonestown, but he could have done more. I would have liked him to address Congress in a speech similar to the one I have created. Members of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, I am Congressman Leo Ryan, representing the 11th District of California. Thank you for giving me your time today in addressing the pertinent issue of Jim Jones and the People's Temple. In February 1974, Archie I. James and Gene Chaikin, two prominent members of the People's Temple signed a lease provided by the Guyanese government to construct a communalist settlement in the jungle located near a small town called Port Kaituma. This was a deliberately planned move by the People's Temple and their leader, Reverend Jim Jones, to further isolate his followers and seek refuge from the investigatory powers of United States authorities. I've warned against the influences of cult religion similar to People's Temple in my speeches chronicled by the Congressional Record. I've previously stated, we have not found a way to attack these jackals who feed on the children and young adults who are too emotionally weak to stand by themselves when they reach the age of consent. It's too bad there isn't a 20th century Charles Dickens to write about the terrible destruction of these 20th century vagans who make themselves rich while they destroy the psyche of so many. Never have my statements been so more relevant on the issue we are currently faced with the People's Temple and Jim Jones. Through meetings with former People's Temple members, Jim Jones is known to be extremely charismatic, and with his mastery of the human psychology, he is able to isolate his followers from any vestiges of their previous life and alienate their family members. My office has concluded that Temple members are expected to have 100% obedience to Jim Jones, and many are forced to submit to psychological and physical pressure from Jones and other Temple leaders. Through this report, I will detail the reasons for a proposed congressional visit to the settlement at Jonestown on November 14, 1978. My esteemed colleagues, hopefully you have learned about the People's Temple and the potential harm that could come to United States citizens. I'll be traveling to Guyana at the request of the concerned relatives in order to further investigate Jonestown.
Despite the discouragement, Congressman Ryan indeed visited Jonestown on November 17, 1978. He wanted justice. He wanted answers. He wanted to help the inhabitants of Jonestown. Instead, he was shot by members of the People's Temple.
The two poems that I have written focus on Maria Katsaris, a devoted member of People's Temple, and also one of Jim Jones' mistresses. I decided to express my feelings about Maria in particular, because upon joining the temple, the once close relationship that she had with her father greatly deteriorated. Her experience affected me personally, because I too have a close relationship with my own father, and I could never imagine breaking the bond as Maria did with her father. Despite the fractured relationship that Maria maintained with her father up until her death, I do not believe that Maria's love for her father was completely banished. I have written poems in the hope that the audience can witness the love and father-daughter tenderness that I believe still existed between Maria and her father. The Broken Tree, a poem in the voice of Maria. My father, a limb snapped from a lemon tree. He falls delicately into my arms. I let him fade. Finger strokes make words in the dirt, a small burial, invisible, forgotten. A breath gets caught in my throat. In falling, I could spell love with the air on my tongue, but it's gone. Rotten seeds sallow sweet grounds, birds peck at the brown flesh. My hands squeeze empty cores of juice, searching for a life that has long dried out. My second poem is in the perspective of Steve Katsaris, Maria's father, as he reflects on his lost daughter and the love that he still had for her. Did you forget? I left a note on the kitchen table. Its pieces are probably frayed and thin by now. At night, the moon cracks through my open window, and the milky light reminds me of your face. Soft, you were weightless, but never weak. Now your eyes hold murmurs of an echo that weans in and out of my charred consciousness. I miss the ruffles in the carpet from your feet, the silverware left napping in the sink, the glass waiting to be warmed by your fingertips. But most, I miss the ardor in your voice. When did it become so broken down? When did it lose its strength too?
I was actually planning on presenting this poem without any introduction, but the more I think about it, the more I just want to make mention that I've written a poem about Maria and Stephen Katsaris, and the reason they hit so close to home for me is that the difference between Maria and her brother's age is very similar to mine and my sister's, and the human of Stephen Katsaris has always reminded me of my own father. And so the stories always kind of freaked me out. Anyway, on November 24th, the newspaper read, "Psychologist's daughter died in suicide. The cause of death was probably cyanide poisoning and severe confusion due to a changing political state in 1960s America, according to her father. The woman is named Maria Katsaris. The father is Stephen, 50, Caucasian. He's quoted as saying, 'I think she was insane at the end.' And let's hope that she was, because she fled her family and her country, and she sent her brother to die on that airstrip, and he may have survived, but no thanks to her, maggots are present. Decomposition is advanced." Stephen knew that Maria shared a special relationship with Jim Jones. She and another woman slept in his cabin in Jonestown. His wife slept elsewhere. Stephen Katsaris never cries. Not in the interviews, not in the transcripts, not in the articles. Stephen Katsaris never cries. Not when his daughter tells reporters that he molested her, not when he tells the reporters about the man who stole his child and her faith and her life. The sex is female, the age estimated between 25 and 40. Conditions of death are similar with findings at the time. The cause of death is likely cyanide poisoning. I've seen men cry for their wives, and I've seen mothers cry for their children and children for their dogs, but none of this haunts me as much as the fact that Stephen Katsaris never cries. Thank you.
I wanted to study more of Stephen Jones because I want to see how he dealt with being the son of the person responsible for the Jonestown tragedy. I discovered that his feelings developed from opposition to forgiveness. In Jonestown, Stephen would sometimes side with his father, but as time went on, he became increasingly oppositional. He would fight with him, he would argue against him. This interview that's about to be shown occurs right after the news of the mass suicide has spread, and before Stephen Jones could even find out exactly what had happened. Here, it's clear that Stephen doesn't care about his father anymore. What he really seems to care about is his family and his other family and his other friends.
How do you think history will eventually come to see your father?
I don't care.
Incredible. You don't care?
I don't care. I don't care how they come to see him. Only that I hope that it just doesn't discredit what I've lived for and what most of the people at one time all of the people have lived for, and that's why I can almost say that I hate this man for doing what he's done, because he has destroyed everything I've lived for.
This next interview occurs in 2010, and it really shows how Stephen has changed.
You have a calmness, and you seem very level and even. Did it take you some time to get to this place?
I have been anything but peaceful in my life.
And I've certainly spent plenty of time in hell on earth.
But over time, he's learned to forgive his father.
I also remember what a character he was, what an incredibly intelligent man he was, and how he could really be very loving.
It amazed me that he could be so calm and at peace with what had happened in his life. Although it's the interviewer saying that Stephen had forgiven his father, it's seen in many other interviews that he actually has made peace with his past. Instead of staying on the fact that his father was an evil man who he hated, Stephen was able to forgive his father and even look at the positive outcomes and the good sides of his father. If this had happened to me, I'm not sure if I could forgive my father or deal with all the anger and the guilt. Today, Stephen continues to live a rather peaceful life, raising his daughter.
In my response to our study of Jonestown, I attempted to uncover the complexities of Reverend Jim Jones' relationship with his biological son, Stephen Jones. There's more to be uncovered, and still more that never will be. The following is a poem I've constructed with a collage of audio clips from the death tape Reverend Jones recorded on the last day.
I'm tired of it all. Please, can we hasten with that medication? You don't know what you've done. It's just too late. It's too late. We have no other road. We can't go back. They won't leave us alone. They're now going back to tell more lies, and there's no way we can survive. Death is a million times preferable to 10 more days of this life. If you knew what was ahead of you, you'd be glad to be stepping over tonight. And I like to choose my own kind of death for a change. I'm tired of being tormented to hell. That's what I'm tired of. Now we have some choice. No, it's not worth living like this. Not worth living like this. That's not living to me. That's not freedom. That's not the kind of freedom I sought. No more, no more, no more. I'm going to lay down my burdens. We don't like the way the world is. Take our life from us. We've had as much of this world as you're going to get. Let's just be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it. No more pain now. No more pain. Step over quietly. It is not to be feared. It's a friend. It's a friend.
And now a poem of my own written in the perspective of Stephen Jones before his first suicide attempt. When I was 12, I walked up behind my mom while Dad was giving a sermon, and I asked, "Mom, how many is an overdose of Quaaludes?" Apparently it was just a couple. I was terrified. I went straight to my brother, Tim Tupper, and I said, "Tim, you better go tell Mom I just overdosed on Quaaludes." Too many Quaaludes to count. I didn't want to intrude, I wanted out. See, I felt so excluded because it's always about his rules, which didn't apply to him, which was fine with them. And I thought it was mine, but they still called him father and called themselves scholars, yet weaker, smaller, as if his white collar gave him magical power. So they gladly gave up every dollar, offered their children to fill his Eden, but it was done in the name of freedom, and that made it okay. And that made it okay? Just lay me down to stay before my edges fray, and my father I shame, who starts to claim my insanity, and sends me to a shrink to be tamed, before my mother gets framed, before the congregation gets raped, and before I get shipped away to the promised land, where the physical demands will push me to stand, proud, until Dad's hands get too aggressive. His movement turns from progressive to oppression, one act of revolution, a pact to drink the cyanide, transparent track to the other side. Fact, it wasn't suicide. let me confide, I didn't want anyone to die. And so it still haunts me to wonder, Dad, why?
Stephen's opposition to his father is inspirational to me. Jim Jones was so successful as the leader of People's Temple because of his manipulative abilities. He was able to create so much commitment that his followers looked up to him as God, and often referred to him as father or dad. Not everyone in People's Temple was totally committed to Jim Jones, however. Jim's only biological son, Stephen Jones, was one of Jim's biggest opponents and staged his own mini-rebellion while in Jonestown. Stephen was only 19 years old when the mass murder-suicide took place, but throughout his time in Jonestown, was able to fight Jones on a variety of issues. Stephen was one of the few people who was not afraid to stand up to Jones directly, and even got into a few physical altercations with him. Stephen would also refuse many of Jim's orders and eventually gained quite a few supporters, including friends on the basketball team and Jim's adopted sons. During the day of the mass suicide murder, Stephen was in Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, for a basketball game. When Jim Jones issued the order in Jonestown for everyone to kill himself or herself, he also called into Georgetown and the United States, telling members of People's Temple there to do the same. Stephen learned of the order and convinced members in Georgetown not to go through with the suicide. He then desperately called all of the branches in the United States to beg members there not to commit the act. One of the people that Stephen happened to contact was Gene Clancy, a dedicated Temple member in San Francisco. When the order was given to the people in the United States, Gene was torn between the decision of whether to stay loyal to the Temple or to keep her life. When Stephen called, Gene decided to not go ahead with the suicide and credits Stephen with her life. Gene Clancy describes her experience of getting an urgent call from Stephen Jones.
The last day, we were at the shortwave radio headquarters in San Francisco. We knew the congressman was there in Guyana. We could not get through. Then somebody cut the radio and we couldn't get through. We were frantic. Then somebody patched through somehow and the message came across. And then suddenly the crushing awareness that this was taking place. We had all pledged that if anything happened, we would take our own lives. It was just each of us alone with our decision, alone with our pledge, our loyalty to the group, to each other. Young Stephen Jones had the courage to call. He called San Francisco repeatedly from Georgetown, from Guyana. Repeatedly, like every half hour. He was saying, don't do anything, don't do anything. You haven't done anything? What a load he absorbed. What a huge, huge thing he assumed. And I credit Stephen with my life because he gave permission to say, that no longer applies. Don't listen to that. You're free from that now. Stephen said this, and what he was saying was life.
In spite of all the lives he did save on November 18th, 1978, Stephen felt enormous guilt for what happened. He was able to save everyone in Georgetown except for Sharon Amos and her children in Lamaha Gardens because he was too late to reach them. Stephen's opposition to his father is inspirational to me because even though his own father was condoning terrible actions and philosophies, Stephen acted as his own individual person with his own viewpoints. Stephen was able to recruit many others to support him and silently fight against Jones. In my opinion, the most inspirational act that Stephen committed was calling the United States after the order was given to commit suicide. As Gene Clancy attests to, Stephen lifted the burden off of these members of having to choose between life and death. Stephen helped them realize that choosing life was okay. Because of this reason, I believe that he single-handedly saved hundreds of lives that fateful day.
Perhaps two of the most confusing events in the story of Jonestown for me would be the visit of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan
and the following mass suicide of the people of Jonestown. Perhaps we will never know the reasoning behind the Reverend Jim Jones's actions. However, I would like to be able to make sense of how these two events are related and to understand the Jonestown tragedy better. Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown with the intention of seeing what it was about and learning about the People's Temple. However, his visit seemed to be the catalyst for the horrific event that took nearly 1,000 lives on November 18, 1978. The relatives of people in Jonestown, formerly known as the Concerned Relatives Group, contacted Ryan in hopes that he would investigate what was actually happening. Upon his visit, Ryan and his delegation attended a reception in one of the community halls of Jonestown, where they were apparently welcomed in a friendly manner. When Jones was leaving the reception, a member of the People's Temple passed a plea note to someone in his group requesting help to leave Jonestown. The next day, when Ryan was leaving, two families tried to leave with him. Jones gave the defectors permission to leave. However, the following events made it clear the catastrophe that was soon to happen. As Ryan was boarding the planes with his group, he was shot dead along with 4 others. And perhaps not so much of a coincidence, Jones preceded this in what is his last statement to the people of Jonestown.
So to sit here and to wait for the catastrophe that's going to happen, and it will happen, it almost happened here, the congressman was nearly killed here. We've been so betrayed. One of the few on that plane is going to shoot the pilot. I know that. I didn't plan it, but I know it's going to happen. I've never lied to you. I'd like to choose my own kind of death for a change. We deserve peace. They deserve peace. Take our life from us. We laid down. We got tired. We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world.
It would seem as though the People's Temple and its move to Guyana was innocent. At first, Jonestown came off as a Christian retreat where one could go with their family to be more in tune with their religion. As you can see in what should be the pictures, it would seem as though Jonestown was just that. However, as we know after the events on November 18th, it is hard to definitively say what Jonestown actually was about. Jones has been reported to have been paranoid about the government and their nosy ways. Could the move to Guyana have been his way of avoiding that? But then the visit from U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan occurred, and it went downhill fast from there. Jonestown met its end. Were the more than 900 deaths there mass suicide or murder? We might never know the entire truth.
On November 18th, 1978, approximately 98,609 people died. Only 909 of them were in Jonestown, Guyana. Not even an outlier, a statistical blip, presenting, mathematically speaking, hardly anything to consider. And yet here we stand, digging through the mass grave of histories, past heroes and past martyrs, tossing aside the uninteresting dead, ignoring their groping hands and accusing eyes, ignoring their constant, unending whisper, "You too shall die." We forget who they have loved and what tricks they played to get out of school, feigning a fever with a bedside lamp. Our eyes are locked solemnly on one corpse. We exhume what fascinations we can from this pit, dead celebrities who are larger than life and larger than death, the colorful bits of a pitch-black story in our academic pursuit of mapping a travesty, grim cartographers with nothing to gain, but the creeping fear we shall suffer the same sort of death, unremembered and remembered alike, not for how we lived, but the way that we died. Thank you.
This poem is made up of lines all taken from accounts on the Jonestown website. The Aftermath of Jonestown, a found poem. Part 1. I'm afraid most people want to forget what happened in Jonestown. You barely hear it spoken about because then one must ask who and why. It has fallen to outsiders to tell your story. Drinking the Kool-Aid, your most indelible contribution to date. Shorthand for slavish obedience, one's own undoing, and the detriment of others. Jonestown, a picture of a galvanized metal vat surrounded by bloated bodies. Children screaming, "No, mommy, no." Sharon Amos's children slit throats than her own. Part 2. Where are all the belongings of those who died? Did they drink the poison willingly? I will never know, but they, along with all the others, are somewhat responsible for what happened that day. The Bible says, honor thy father and thy mother. It doesn't say anything about who they are or what they have done. Part 3. There is an instinct in us to put it all right, to save the world, if you will. You don't do that with lies. This is to remind us, so it doesn't happen again. The music we created still seems very special.
People's Temple in Jonestown is most famous for the mass suicide murder that took place on November 18, 1978, in Jonestown, Guyana. The typical viewpoint of this event is that a bunch of brainwashed followers blindly followed a deranged maniac to their deaths. This is far from the truth. In reality, there were many who opposed Jones and even vocally expressed their opinions. Most notably is Christine Miller, who argued against Jones on the final day in an attempt to save the lives of People's Temple members, particularly the children.
Christine Miller was born on June 4th, 1918. Born into a poor family and with a childhood that was far from easy, she worked hard for everything she attained later in life. As she said, "I pulled myself up by the bootstraps." Through hard work and determination, she was able to attain a job as a county clerk. She moved to Los Angeles, where she was able to purchase a home, a car, and a few luxuries. Christine had a great appreciation for the finer things in life. She never lost sight of where she came from and of all the hard work that it took to make her so successful.
Christine joined People's Temple while living in LA. She was able to offer much help by contributing financially, and it was through generosity of members like Christine that the LA Temple gained the reputation of the church's pocketbook. Even so, Christine differed from other temple members because she refused to give up the things she worked so hard to attain.
See John die?
What's that?
You mean you want to see John, the little one, the king?
I want to see.
When we destroy ourselves, we're defeated.
To Russia. You think Russia's going to want? No, not going to. We're not. You think Russia's going to want us with all this stigma? We had some value, but now we don't have any value.
Well, I don't see it like that. I mean, I feel like that as long as there's life, there's hope. That's my faith.
Well, some never.
Christine was a woman who knew what she wanted. From the beginning of her time in People's Temple, right up to the final moments, she was not afraid to refute or argue with Jones. Somehow, she managed to keep her sanity and to remain true to her beliefs amidst all the insanity of Jonestown. On November 18th, 1978, the last fateful day, she was the one sane voice rising above the crowd who spoke out in favor of life.
Unfortunately, Christine did not escape with her life during the final white night. Multiple sources report that Christine was forced to the front of the line during the administration of the cyanide, and that Christine's body was found with multiple needle marks in her arms, suggesting that she was clearly murdered and did not voluntarily drink the cyanide-laced flavor aid.
Christine is heroic to us because of her bravery and courage in standing up to Jim Jones, as he was trying to push his radical viewpoints. Christine was not afraid to fight for her life and the life of the children of the People's Temple. She took the microphone and stood up to Jones despite being ridiculed by other members of the People's Temple. Christine also argued rationally and powerfully when she states that, as long as there's life, there's hope. That's my faith. She is actually directly quoting Jones from one of his previous sermons. Christine will always be remembered as a voice of reason, life, and hope.
Christine Miller at Jonestown. Listen to Christine Miller. Look at all we've built, she says. You hesitate, thinking this is a dream. You know the real story. You know how this ends. So you take a step back, waiting for a fog to settle that will make Jonestown a jungle once more. Christine sees this, places one hand on her hip while motioning for you to enter the town with the other. The left side of her mouth tilts upward in a testy, sassy smirk that reminds you of a face your mother makes, and it dawns on you. Christine never lived until now. Though you've heard her voice, seen her face, she has been no more visible than wind. You panic suddenly. Tell her she must leave this place. She will die otherwise. You expect her to look fearful, to run toward you and away from Jonestown. She grabs your hand from your side instead, looks into your eyes, and nods before turning and walking further into Jonestown. She doesn't look back.
Only a handful of People's Temple members present in Jonestown on that final night lived to tell the tale. The stories of Hyacinth Thrash and Odell Rhodes are unique. When an announcement instructed all Jonestown residents to meet in the pavilion, Hyacinth Thrash remained in her bed. She didn't suspect anything out of the ordinary until she heard a single gunshot, causing her to hide under her bed and eventually fall asleep. When she awoke at 7 the next morning, she stepped out of her cabin and saw the macabre massacre. The body of her sister Zipporah was one of the first that she saw. As more members fell to the ground, their mouths foaming from the cyanide, Odell Rhodes was asked by a member of the Planning Commission, Jim Jones's inner circle, to fetch a stethoscope to ensure that every person's heart had indeed stopped beating. Odell ran to the medical house, pausing but for a moment to look upon a field covered with the bodies of children and their mothers. Recognizing the true nature of the situation, Odell hid himself to preserve his own life. The following dialogue is a compilation of quotations from Hyacinth and Odell that attempts to capture the utter disbelief and guilt that plagues the victims of Jonestown, the survivors of Jonestown, in their own words.
I try not to think about nothing. Nothing I can do about it. He was trying to do things that the Bible said was right. The doctor said it was a miraculous thing. Boy, oh boy, I got sick of him talking about sex. Everything we asked, we gave him. Sometimes you do things that you never think you would do. I was through with him that night. They had nights. I wasn't afraid. I was just blank.
A lot of people just walked around like they were in a trance.
I don't know how I felt or what I thought. God is a good God.
I don't know if they even tried to get away. I'm just trying to figure out why these people would voluntarily kill themselves. They would draw up an amount into syringes.
I saw a big thing of cyanide. I saw needles everywhere. I seen them on the ground there. I seen my sister right away. Zip, Zippy, Zipporah. The devil is so busy.
They would take the syringes, and a nurse or someone else would put it into a person's mouth, and the people would simply swallow it down.
He made them move all the people up. We was brainwashed too. We just followed him out there. I wouldn't go. I said I wasn't going and I meant it.
He had a lot of ego and had to be in control. He had us call him Father.
Papa, isn't there a better place? He didn't even send for me, but there wasn't any way we could leave. After the Civil War, we was freed, but we wasn't free. He said he wanted to. He said...
He was telling people it wasn't painful, and that, people had to die with dignity.
Anybody would get fed up with that. I guess they started killing about 7 that night. If someone had knocked me on the head, I walked around there pinching myself to see whether I was alive or dead.
A lot of people just walked around like they were in a trance.
She was lying outside on the pavilion like the others. Zip, Zippy, Zipporah. Papa, isn't there a better place?
Babies and children went first.
I don't think I would ever go again. I try not to think about nothing. Nothing I can do about it. I've made it this far. I want to go home.
I decided to commemorate the children of Jonestown in a poem because I feel that in many tragedies, the lost lives of the people, especially those of children, are often overshadowed by other aspects, such as the sensationalism, news media, and the madman. I believe that the children who lost their lives at Jonestown deserve to not just be mentioned, but to be remembered always. While this type of remembrance and commemoration applies to all the lost lives at Jonestown as well, I found the loss of the children's lives to be particularly poignant because of their youth, innocence, and promise. While the pain of loss may gently fade over time, and the rawness of tragedy may grow dim, the lost lives of innocence should never be forgotten. They must be recognized, felt, and understood by all, remembered always. Do not forget. I hear shouts, thoughts about what this all means. Bright paper and a madman sketched in black. Everyone forgets about the ones with light voices. Mist still covers the grassy hill. Youth still lingers on their faces. A fogged school bus makes a path in the rain, carrying small eyes soon to be covered. Their smiles don't know the taste of bitterness. Their ears, not the sound of hate. They're taken without regret, stolen. Tiny things, they sparkle, they become dull. Tucked away, they become lost pieces. All blow away the dust and rehang the white balloons. Drape the flowers from the door again, scatter the crosses and ribbons in the moonlit grass. Watch the candles make warm stars for the dirt angels. A kneeling statue waits for them, her hands folded. Bodies tied together, hung from a bedroom tree. I can always see you. I will never forget.
During a celebration held on November 17th, the day before the mass death, people of Jonestown could be found dancing to songs like Earth, Wind, and Fire's That's the Way of the World. The gathering of temple members was held in an effort to convince Congressman Ryan that all was well at Jonestown, that the people in residence there were content and did not want to leave. Clearly, the story was much more complicated. In retrospect, the lyrics of that song eerily resonate following the mass death of nearly 1,000 individuals.
It was a vibrant community. I would never have imagined that 24 hours later those people would be dead.
The lyrics read, "Hearts of fire creates love desire, take you high and higher to the place you belong. Hearts of fire creates love desire, high and higher to your place on the throne." We've come together on this special day to sing our message loud and clear. Looking back, we've touched on sorrowful days, future past, they disappear. You will find peace of mind if you look way down into your heart and soul. Don't hesitate, because the world seems cold. Stay young at heart, because you're never, never old at heart. That's the way of the world. Plant your flower and you grow a pearl. A child is born with a heart of gold. The way of the world makes his heart turn cold. The story of the Jonestown tragedy personally affected me at first glance. Digging a little deeper, I realized that the individuals who lost their lives on November 18th, 1978 were my sisters, my brother, my parents, my grandparents. These people were not brainwashed, Kool-Aid drinking zombie cult members. They could have been any of us. They each have their own story to be told and retold with the examination of the Jonestown tragedy. I feel that it is our responsibility as scholars, onlookers, the future generations to come and those that may have passed, to remember the individual narratives that each of the lost lives could have told, and keep the memory of this tragedy alive. Look upon it respectfully, and be cautious not to see it repeated. Perhaps it was put best in a letter that was found in Jonestown on that last day.
Whomever finds the snow.
To whomever finds the snow.
Collect all the tapes, all the writing, all the history.
The story of this movement, this action, must be examined over and over.
It must be understood in all of its incredible dimensions.
Let all of the story of this people's temple be told.
Let all the books be opened.
We know there is no way that we can avoid misinterpretation.
This is the last day of our lives.
We are at a cross purpose with history.
But we are calm in this hour of our collective leave-taking.
As I write these words, people are silently amassed, taking a quick potion, inducing sleep, relief.
We are alone and suffering people.
I wish I had the time to put it all together. The meaning of a people, a struggle, to find the symbolic and eternal in this moment. I wish that I had done it.
I did not do it. I failed.
A tiny kitten sits next to me. A dog barks. The birds gather on the telephone wires.
Darkness settles over Jonestown on its last day on Earth.
For this church, if anyone caused or tried to harm this church, I would kill the president or stake my life on this church or to protect the pastor.
My name is John Harris, and I'm a violent revolutionary, and I killed 3 children.
Your name? Corinne Jackson. I would kill any government official that would stand in the way of our church progress.
Your name?
I'm Malatardi.
Who?
I'm Malatardi.
What would you do for this cause?
Oh, I would kill, murder, do anything, you know.
Who?
Oh, I'll kill Nixon and Ford and anybody else like him.
All right.